From courtside of the virtual hardwood, it's the NLSC Podcast, a weekly show for basketball gamers and hardcore hoopheads. Andrew with you once again. I'm joined as always by my co-host Derek, aka D4 Derek, I think we all feel that we could do a better job than NBA GMs, at least some of the time, and video games give us that chance. It's something that's on our minds at this time of the year especially, so please, tip us off.
Yeah, this episode is going to be centered around the NBA trade deadline. This is going to be more of a historical look, both related to real-life transactions and transactions that took place on the virtual hardwood. I asked the community, now that the trade deadline is over, we want to know, historically related to your favorite team, what was your favorite trade, your least favorite trade, and maybe the trade you wished your team had made. I also asked the community, question for franchise gamers, what trade were you able to make where you were surprised it went through, and who was the best player you ever traded for? But because we're talking about the history of the NBA trade deadline, I wanted to start this episode off with an article written for the site Complex, and it was written by Aaron C. Mansfield, and it's titled The 20 Biggest Trade Deadline Deals in NBA History. And this was recently written. It was February 3rd, 2026. And so our audience understands this article goes back roughly 30 years. It goes back to 1995, but they only started officially tracking trade deadline deals in 1987.
Yeah, there's actually an article on NBA.com that lists the entire history of the trade deadline. And in the introduction, it says, though the NBA has kept a trade deadline dating back to January 1947, the inaugural BAA season, of course, Derek, deadline-related transaction records have only been officially tracked back to 1987, when the deadline was set to 9 p.m. Eastern Time on the 16th Thursday of the season. So yeah, that's interesting that they weren't keeping detailed records of those deadline deals. Obviously, transaction records are there. You can go on Basketball Reference and see Wilt Chamberlain's trade history, which does include a mid-season trade at one point in his career. So the transaction records are there, but as far as the deadline deals, yeah, they weren't officially tracking them. So yeah, that is interesting.
Get to this article. It's from the site Complex, the 20 biggest trade deadline deals in NBA history. At number 20, Andrew, they list Blake Griffin to the Pistons in 2018. And the deal was Pistons receive Blake Griffin, Willie Reed, and Bryce Johnson. Clippers receive Avery Bradley, former Celtic, Tobias Harris, Boban, a first-round pick, and a second-round pick. And of course, Andrew, Blake Griffin had an amazing first full season in Detroit in 18-19, where he was an all-star. It was his last great season. He averaged 24.5 points, 7.5 rebounds. The Pistons actually finished 41-41 that season and got swept by Milwaukee in the first round. And of course, after that season, boom, hit by major injuries, was never even close to being able to play a full season again, and finished his career with Boston at age 33, which is relatively young still, in 2023, where he averaged 4.1 points and played 41 games.
Yeah, real shame, because Blake Griffin, a very exciting player to watch, as you say, out of the league by 33, way too young. You know, and he's not the only player to retire that young for various reasons. Obviously, injury is always a sad case. Feels like he'd still be able to play today if he was healthy and be a contributor on a playoff team and maybe even a championship team. But yeah, certainly a big deal at the time, but didn't work out in the long run for Detroit thanks to those unfortunate injuries.
Looking at this next trade mention, this is pretty lopsided. When you look at it after the production this player had with his new team. Isaiah Thomas to the Celtics in 2015. Celtics receive Isaiah Thomas. Suns receive Marcus Thornton and a first-round pick. As it states here, Isaiah Thomas wasn't viewed as a star when he was dealt to Boston, but the Celtics took a low-risk chance on a small guard with a huge chip on his shoulder and reaped the rewards. Thomas blossomed into one of the league's most electric scorers following the trade. He climbed into the MVP conversation and produced one of the most memorable individual playoff runs in recent NBA history. And that states Thomas instantly became the heartbeat of the team and is beloved by Boston to this day. Yeah, being from the area, I did see a couple games live with Isaiah Thomas. The arena was electric. The way he played on the floor was super inspiring. He was actually one of my grandfather's favorite players that ever put on a Celtics uniform. And because of the energy he brought on the court, my grandfather likened him actually to Bob Cousy, who Bob Cousy is a player that my grandfather watched live. That's my grandfather's favorite player of all time. Just loved the passion that he displayed on the floor. Great scorer.
Yeah, that's excellent company to be mentioned in, Bob Cousy. And once again, injuries, unfortunately, with Isaiah Thomas cutting that run with the Celtics short when he tried to bravely play through that, and unfortunately was never quite the same player again. Hasn't been able to have that send-off in the NBA that I think he deserves, that I think he earned, establishing himself as a star at that height. Muggsy Bogues often puts heart over height in his social media posts, and I think Isaiah Thomas is definitely one of those players that embodies that, without a doubt. Yeah, that stands out as one of the best deadline deals that the team has made. One of the shrewdest moves, like the article said, taking the chance on a player who wasn't yet a star, but definitely had potential, the chip on his shoulder to prove himself, clearly had the talent. Yeah, I know you like that trade.
At number 18, Jeff Hornacek to the Jazz in 1994. Jazz received Jeff Hornacek, Sean Green, and a second-round pick. 76ers received Jeff Malone and a first-round pick. And Jeff Malone, obviously an outstanding scorer himself, averaged over 20 points per game in his NBA career. But obviously, as the article states, the Jazz were looking for that third scorer, and they were able to achieve that with Hornacek. And obviously the Jazz made back-to-back finals with Hornacek playing a key role in 1997 and 1998. But amazing shooter, great player. And, you look at a trade like this, though, and it's not lopsided. It's pretty even.
Yeah, Jeff Malone was still producing at that time, was no longer an all-star, quite a few years removed from that incredible game winner with the Bullets back in the 80s, but still a very solid player, had a couple more solid years before his career went down with the 76ers, and I believe he ended up playing for the Heat in 1996, his last year in the NBA. But yeah, a pretty even deal. Sometimes it's not just about the talent of the players, but also the fit.
At 17, it's Tim Hardaway to the Heat, 1996. The Heat received Tim Hardaway and Chris Gatling. The Warriors receive Kevin Willis and Bimbo Coles. Obviously, Tim Hardaway was an injury risk. Because if you remember correctly, he missed the entire 93-94 season with an injury, robbing us of a super team, which would have included Tim Hardaway, Charles Sprewell, Chris Mullin, and Chris Webber. But, the Heat, when he went there, what a great acquisition. They ended up winning 60 games in a tough Eastern Conference. And he was a super clutch player, great floor general, great scorer. And, came off those injuries and put together some great seasons.
It's funny because his stock had obviously fallen with the Warriors. They'd acquired B.J. Armstrong from the Raptors in the offseason. The Raptors acquired B.J. Armstrong from the Bulls through the expansion draft in 1995. Armstrong was not interested in playing for an expansion team, basically said, I don't want to report, I don't want to play for you. So they ended up trading him to the Warriors. And B.J. Armstrong ended up starting for the Warriors that year, displaced Tim Hardaway, the established All-Star. And yes, I know Armstrong had one All-Star appearance in 1994, voted in by the fans, but Hardaway, definitely the superior player. And Armstrong actually did go on to have some injury problems, had a solid season in 1998 where he ended up with the Hornets, but yeah, he was never quite the same player again, whereas Hardaway bounced back, was a big part of some very strong Heat teams that were in title contention, as much as you could be with the champion Bulls, I suppose, in the late 90s. So yeah, definitely a great acquisition for the Heat. And people do forget, Derek, because the Warriors have become this dynasty over the past decade, had some amazing years, obviously, made some great moves, but for a while there, and longtime Warriors fans can attest to this, they were kind of a, not joke franchise, but certainly they were making a lot of questionable moves and, languishing in obscurity, apart from the We Believe run and so forth. There was a long drought between the Rick Barry days and the Steph Curry era where the Warriors definitely weren't fun to watch most of the time.
Yeah, well, what's strange is they had a lot of talent over the years, even in the years that they were struggling, but they were never able to put it together. right? They were always missing that one key piece. And oftentimes it was a really strong front court. I feel like the Warriors, through their struggling years, whether it be at points in the 90s, after Weber was gone, or whether it be in the early 2000s and whatnot, what they were missing was a super strong front court. Because if you look at it historically, they had quite a few really talented backcourt players and wings and whatnot. But I just feel like they never had that front court piece.
Oh, that's definitely true. And also the front office, not just the front court, but the front office didn't necessarily have the best leadership. Lots of turmoil. Chris Webber getting traded after a season, demanding out after his rookie season, after clashing with Don Nelson. So they definitely had some personnel issues before they all brought it together in the early 2010s.
Moving on to number 16, Darren Williams to the Nets in 2011. The Nets received Darren Williams. The Jazz received Devin Harris, Derek Favors, and 2 first-round picks. As it states in the article, this was Brooklyn's first big swing amid its relocation from New Jersey to Brooklyn. After a long chase, the Nets bet on Williams, a strong do-it-all point guard, to be the centerpiece of their new franchise. For a while, it looked like a brilliant move as Williams put up big numbers and looked like one of the best guards in the league, but this iteration of the Nets never became a true contender, and D-Will's prime faded much quicker than expected. Who can forget the graphic that was shared on social media back then when it was Darren Williams, Joe Johnson, Paul Pierce, and Kevin Garnett and Brook Lopez, and it was supposed to be just this incredible super team. And ownership at the time really went all in, even though obviously Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce were past their prime, etc. It didn't matter. It went all in trying to get that championship, and they were never able to make anything out of that.
Another quintessential basketball video game team, quite frankly. Great on the virtual hardwood, but not a great fit in real life, and certainly age and injuries a factor as well.
At 15, DeMarcus Cousins to the Pelicans in 2017. DeMarcus Cousins will always be a FanDuel legend for me. Back then, it was the only year that I actually played FanDuel, the first year he was with the Pelicans. And I just remember monster stat lines for him. 90 fantasy points one night, 95 another night. It was like you have to get DeMarcus Cousins in your lineup if you have any chance to win any money. I haven't played FanDuel since then. Not really liking the way that scene is and whatnot. But yeah, to me, he'll always be a FanDuel legend. Anyway, with that trade, Pelicans receive DeMarcus Cousins and Omri Caspi. The Kings receive Buddy Hield, Tyreek Evans, Langston Galloway, first-round pick, and a second-round pick. So Complex states, this trade looked downright unfair. Pairing Boogie with Anthony Davis gave the Pelicans the most physically imposing front court in the NBA. Though it took some time for Boogie and AD to play well together, they eventually found their rhythm. However, this duo never achieved what New Orleans envisioned, as Cousins' Achilles injury derailed their hopes of becoming a contender. And if I remember correctly, that injury could have been totally prevented, and it was when a game was completely out of reach. And what a terrible way for him to basically ruin his career. It continues. Cousins only spent 1.5 seasons with New Orleans. The injury marked the end of his prime and tanked his value on the market. After finding a dearth of suitors, he signed the mid-levels exception with Golden State in 2018. Obviously, he wasn't the same player, Andrew. So that whole thing where it's, they added DeMarcus Cousins. Well, it wasn't the same Cousins.
And of course, a very infamous trade because he found out as he was wrapping up an All-Star appearance. And I believe that was the deal that kind of encouraged the NBA to move the trade deadline forward so that you wouldn't potentially have All-Stars being traded during All-Star weekend. It kind of ruins the vibe.
At number 14, Jason Kidd to the Mavericks in 2008. This resulted in a championship later on, Andrew. Mavericks received Jason Kidd and Antoine Wright. Nets received Devin Harris, Trenton Hassel, Desagna Diop, even though Complex states Desagna Dip, Andrew. Keith Van Horn, 2 first-round picks. So Devin Harris ended up going back to the Mavericks later on, years later, and I believe he may have retired a Maverick as well. So Complex states 20 months after falling in the NBA Finals to the Heat, the Mavericks traded for an aging Jason Kidd, believing that his leadership and one-of-a-kind playmaking could book them a return trip. The trade wasn't an instant success, but Kidd was a crucial part of the Dallas 2011 championship run 3 years later. Kidd's arrival didn't set off instant fireworks, but it eventually played a crucial role in one of the most unlikely title runs in modern NBA history. I think that that Mavericks run in 2011 may be the toughest run to an NBA championship in NBA history. They took out a tough Portland team in the first round, swept the previous year's champion Lakers in the next round. They took out a tough Oklahoma City Thunder team in the next round with Westbrook and Durant, followed by taking out the big three in the finals of Wade, Bosh, and LeBron. But yeah, Jason Kidd played a key role in that title run, and yeah, they don't regret that trade.
Yeah, it's hard to think of playoff runs to the championship that are more impressive. Maybe the Rockets in 1995 as a 6th seed, that's definitely up there as well, but I definitely did enjoy seeing the Mavericks win the 2011 title. Probably one of my favourite championship series, not involving the Bulls, actually. And it's funny because I remember people in the forums saying, oh, what a terrible move, bringing back Jason Kidd. The Mavericks have just thrown away their future by trading Devin Harris. And that just goes to show that, you know, it's not just the professional talking heads and analysts that get it wrong. A lot of fans' predictions aren't accurate as well. And sure, Jason Kidd was getting up there in years and Devin Harris seemed like this rising star, but Jason Kidd is ultimately the superior player, the superior playmaker. That's what they needed. And no, it didn't pay off in 2008, but 3 years later, his return to the Mavericks clearly paid off.
Number 13, Kyrie Irving to the Mavericks, 2023. I wouldn't rank this higher. But hey, you know, there's going to be some recency bias in here. But Mavericks receive Kyrie Irving and Markieff Morris. Nets receive Spencer Dinwiddie, Dorian Finney-Smith, first-round pick, and 2 second-round picks. It states trading for the controversial scorer was viewed as a gamble, a test of whether Kyrie's talent could outweigh his off-court turbulence, but Dallas needed another elite playmaker to complement Luka Doncic and were willing to part with valuable pieces to make it happen. They took the risk and rewarded for it. Kyrie's shot making took pressure off Luka and helped the Mavs reach the 2024 NBA Finals, which they lost in 5 games to the Celtics. The duo did not play together long as Doncic was dealt to the Lakers in February of 2025. Yeah, I mean, they made it to the NBA Finals, but I'm not sure I would rank this higher than the Kidd trade.
Yeah, I don't think it really qualifies as one of the most iconic deals, and obviously at 13 it's not the highest on the list. But yeah, like you say, maybe a bit of recency bias there. I will say, of course, that it's a much better deal than trading Luka Doncic a couple of years later.
At number 12, Dikembe Mutombo to the 76ers in 2001. And I think the biggest reason that this trade happened was because of the Theo Ratliff injury. I'm not sure if they ever would have pulled the trigger on this if it hadn't, because from memory, they were playing well with the 2 big pieces of this trade. Before that injury, they had Theo Ratliff and Tony Kukoc on that Iverson Sixers team. But obviously, Ratliff went down with a serious injury, and boom, the trade happens. 76ers received Dikembe Mutombo and Rashawn McLeod. Hawks received Theo Ratliff, Nazir Mohammed, Pepe Sanchez, Tony Kukoc, and a first-round pick. I'm not going to read the complex write-up on this one, but basically, you know the history. The 76ers ended up unexpectedly making the NBA Finals with a historically kind of weak supporting cast for Allen Iverson, but they did have Dikembe Mutombo as a result of that trade. Obviously, Iverson surrounded by Eric Snow and Aaron McKee and George Lynch, an aging Tyrone Hill, Jermaine Jones, etc. Not a lot of names that jump out at you. But they were good defensively. They were a strong defensive team. And in fact, Iverson in one of his recent documentaries stated that because he was surrounded by so many good defenders, it allowed him to shine. It allowed him to, get in those passing lanes, and not be a strong on-ball defender himself, but kind of be hidden behind those good defenders on his team. But yeah, Dikembe Mutombo, Andrew, to the 76ers.
Yeah, big deal as far as the names involved, and the Sixers making it to the finals made it even more memorable, kind of like the Kyrie Irving deal years later, I suppose. But yeah, we have reflected on that before, and as you said, Probably not the best deal to make in hindsight. Maybe a knee-jerk reaction because of Theo Ratliff's injury, but kind of worked out.
Number 11, Marc Gasol to the Raptors in 2019, and this resulted in Marc Gasol getting an NBA championship. Raptors received Marc Gasol, and the Grizzlies received Jonas Valanciunas, CJ Miles, DeLon Wright, and a second-round pick. It states Marc Gasol was never the flashiest player in the league, but he did the little things needed for a championship team defense, defensive rebounding, and unselfishness. The Raptors gave up some real assets to scoop him up, but Gasol's passing, toughness, and defensive IQ stabilized the Raptors from the moment he arrived. In the playoffs, he contributed on both ends. Gasol gave Toronto the big body it desperately needed to defend Joel Embiid. Obviously, we remember that series because of Kawhi Leonard's amazing shot from the corner that bounced off the side of the rim and somehow found a way to fall. It continues. Kawhi Leonard is the star remembered for Toronto's title run, but Gasol was the piece that allowed everything else to work. The unsung hero.
And yeah, we're going to be getting to Mark's brother in due course, I'm sure, but I think that's a good way of putting it, kind of the unsung hero of that title run.
And number 10, Kevin Durant to the Suns in 2023. Again, super recency bias, and he never did anything with
I don't know about
the
that
Suns. So the trade is Suns receive Kevin Durant and TJ Warren, bubble Warren, Andrew. 50 points in the bubble, Warren. Nets receive Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, Jay Crowder, 4 first-round picks, and a first-round pick swap. And you really look at it now, and was it worth it for what they achieved with Durant on the Suns? All of those picks? You gotta wonder. Anyway, Durant heading to Phoenix sent shockwaves through the league, betting that Durant's prolific scoring would vault them back to the finals, and it didn't, Andrew. The Suns gave up most of their assets to build a super team around KD and Devin Booker. The chemistry between Durant and Booker was on point early, but injuries and depth issues ultimately prevented the Suns from reaching the ceiling they envisioned. Durant's Suns' tenure only lasted 2.5 seasons, as he was traded in June 2025 to the Houston Rockets in a historic 7-team deal. This should not be rated this high. I'm sorry.
Yeah, in terms of impact and whether it was a great trade, being top 10 does feel extremely generous. Although, in all fairness, to refer back to what I said about the Mutombo deal, and that was probably still a better deal because they did actually make the finals, so he did actually bolster their interior defense, as opposed to the Suns coming up well short of expectations, as you said, with Durant. But as far as the star power involved, the fact that Durant had left the Warriors kind of on bad terms to start this new experiment in Brooklyn, that blew up, and then he demanded out of there, supposedly. I suppose it's historically significant for that reason and the star power involved, but to call it one of the best trades, to rank it in the top 10 and imply that it's one of the best trades at the deadline, yeah, I'm with you. I don't think it belongs there.
Number 9, James Harden to the 76ers, 2022. Again,
I'm sensing a theme.
What actually happened? Yeah, I'm sensing a theme too. 76ers receive James Harden and Paul Millsap. Nets receive Ben Simmons, Seth Curry, Andre Drummond, and 2 first-round picks. Obviously a disaster for the Nets there, right? And not exactly great for the Sixers as far as results go. We don't need to go too much into this one. His tenure with Philadelphia wasn't very long. I know that this article, it does say like the biggest trade deadline deals. So at the time, obviously, James Harden getting moved to the 76ers, who do have Joel Embiid and whatnot and other pieces, was a big deal. But the results, where were they? They're not really there.
One of those deals that on paper is certainly big. It's certainly big news, but as far as results go, not that special.
And number 8, Tyrese Halliburton to the Pacers in 2022. This did result, obviously, in a recent finals berth. Pacers received Tyrese Halliburton, Buddy Hield, and Tristan Thompson. Kings receive DeMontis Sabonis, Justin Holiday, Jeremy Lamb, and a second-round pick. The article states, it wasn't immediately clear who won this deal, but with time, it became evident the Pacers pulled off a heist. Halliburton was already showing star traits in Sacramento, and Indiana pounced when it had the opportunity to pick him up, even if it meant trading their own promising young player, Sabonis, who, in all fairness, has carved out an all-star career with amazing numbers in Sacramento, right?
Yeah.
But the Pacers rebuilt their entire identity around the point guard's speed and creativity. Halliburton would blossom into the face of the franchise, one of the best passers and closers in the league, and nearly led Indiana to the 2024-25 title. Obviously, he had that injury and wasn't able to play in much of the finals. And lastly, it states this was a full franchise reset, and Indiana was rewarded for its boldness.
Yeah, in terms of acquiring a talented player, can't really fault the Kings for getting Sabonis. And of course, the Kings did finally get back to the playoffs in 2023, in no small part due to Sabonis. Got his chest stomped on by Draymond Green, because Draymond Green's going to Draymond Green. So in that respect, not the worst swap of talent, but again, it comes down to results and fit. So in that respect, yeah, the Pacers definitely got the better end of the deal.
At number 7, Ray Allen to the Supersonics in 2003. Shuttlesworth was on the move. Supersonics received Ray Allen, Kevin Ollie, Ronald Murray, also known as Flip Murray, in a first-round pick. Bucks receive Gary Payton and Desmond Mason. I had fun doing this trade on the My NBA Eras roster on NBA 2K25. This deal looked questionable from the jump. Why would the Bucks move their young franchise icon, Ray Allen, for Gary Payton? Of course, the Glove had long been known as one of the best defenders in the game, but his prime was nearing its end. Even more concerning, Payton was an unrestricted free agent after this season. He only stuck around for 28 regular season games plus the playoffs, and then signed with the Lakers during the summer. And then, obviously, Gary Payton ended up with the Celtics in 04-05, and then he ends up with the Heat in 05-06. So I wouldn't call it a turbulent few years for Gary Payton, but he was on the move quite a bit. I mean, he ended up making the finals with that stacked Lakers squad in 2004, then ends up winning the NBA championship with the Heat in 2006 as a backup to Jason Williams. So interesting few years for Gary Payton there. The article continues, meanwhile, Allen became the face of the Sonics franchise over the next 4 years. The Sonics still struggled with Allen on the roster, but he was an all-NBA player. One team in this deal thought short-term, the winner thought long-term.
And certainly an acrimonious split with the Supersonics for Gary Payton. Traded after his 999th game with the team, so he didn't even get to his 1000th game with the Supersonics, would have been the only player to do so. So it felt kind of petty in that respect. And also the fact that he had clashed with team ownership, and we can't completely absolve the Glove of any blame here. That's been well documented that he was pretty difficult to deal with at the time, getting a bit frustrated with the direction of the team, and certainly clashing with team ownership. And of course, since that was the ownership group that ended up selling the team and leading to the relocation to Oklahoma City and the rebranding to the Thunder, the loss of the Supersonics, yeah, that ownership group is definitely not popular with fans in Seattle, but it certainly did begin with that split with Gary Payton. And yeah, obviously Ray Allen had a fairly good run there in Seattle. 2005 was a good year, but ultimately had more success with the Celtics. As you said, Gary Payton ended up getting the ring with the Heat as well. But yeah, definitely an infamous deal because of the behind-the-scenes politics.
Number 6, Carmelo Anthony to the Knicks, 2011. Again, questionable results, chemistry issues, stuff like that. But obviously, Melo's talent, undeniable. Knicks received Carmelo Anthony, Chauncey Billups, Ronaldo Balkman, Anthony Carter, and Sheldon Williams. I can't not think of Candace Parker when Sheldon Williams gets brought up. I think more about Candace Parker and her career than Sheldon Williams' short NBA career. Nuggets received Wilson Chandler, Raymond Felton, Danilo Gallinari, Timofey Mozgov, first-round pick, 2 second-round picks, and cash. And the Timberwolves were also part of this deal. They received Corey Brewer, Anthony Randolph, and your favorite player of all time, Eddie Curry. So I want to point out that, and I know you're going to remember this, after this trade took place, the Nuggets were on a roll with their new pieces, with Gallo, Wilson Chandler, etc. And they looked like they had won the trade at that point. And obviously the Knicks in this case, they paired Carmelo Anthony with Amari Stoudemire. Obviously Amari Stoudemire was unable to stay healthy in a Knicks uniform for a long period of time. But yeah, definitely an interesting trade. There were obviously things that happened in New York that rubbed fans the wrong way. How the Jeremy Lin situation was handled. There was rumors that Carmelo Anthony was jealous of Jeremy Lin, and that's part of the reason why New York moved on from him so early. In fact, the season after Lin's sanity and after that injury and whatnot. But Yeah, before Carmelo went there, it was Amare Stoudemire's team, right? And he had made a big splash when he first got there, putting up amazing numbers and winning
MVP
games
candidate,
and whatnot. Yeah, MVP candidate and whatnot. So the Carmelo move, not popular with everybody.
And I'd certainly say that is iconic because, LeBron had moved on with the decision. Melo was still with the Nuggets, but there were rumblings entering the season that he wanted to move on as well, was not a free agent, so he had to push for that trade. And again, another split that didn't endear the player to their former team. Of course, number 15 now belongs to Jokic in Denver, and he's the player that they're going to retire that for. And Melo has commented on that before. Although, to his credit, I don't think he's that salty about it. I think he does understand. He has come to be more associated with the Knicks, I guess, after that trade, especially with Jokic having that number 15. And other players like Anthony Randolph got that number 15 pretty soon after Melo was traded. So I think that does highlight how the split wasn't particularly amicable, if you will. But yeah, certainly belongs on a list of memorable and impactful trades.
Number 5, Rasheed Wallace to the Pistons in 2004. Pistons received Rasheed Wallace and Mike James. Mike James, one of the most impressive players I've actually seen live. I watched him in 05-06. I went to a Celtics game. And he was the Raptors starting point guard that year. I think it was the year he averaged about 20 points per game. It was his best year of his career. But I just couldn't believe how impressive he looked up close. I had great seats to that game. And just his handle, his shooting, everything just amazing watching him play. Celtics received Chucky Atkins, Lindsey Hunter, a first-round pick in cash. And the Hawks, obviously, were part of this trade, Andrew. Hawks received Rebraca, I don't know if I pronounced that right, Bob Sura, Chris Mills, and a first-round pick. And the Hawks had to be involved in this trade, Andrew, because Rasheed Wallace played one amazing game with them. And that's how the Pistons ended up getting him. It was after he had played that game with the Hawks. So interesting deal. Obviously, that made them the best front court defensive team in the NBA with, Rasheed Wallace and Ben Wallace. And that team was so good. And if you remember correctly, that this team was so deep and so good, they ended up having 4 players make the All-Star team in the mid-2000s.
And this is the kind of deal that belongs on a list like this, because that did bolster the Pistons roster and certainly affected their fortunes in 2004. They were already a team on the rise coming to the season, but Rasheed Wallace, an excellent pickup. They go on to defeat the Lakers in the finals, a team that was favoured from the beginning of the year after getting Karl Malone and Gary Payton, of course. Yeah, easily one of the biggest and best deadline deals in NBA history. And of course, Rasheed Wallace's one-game stint with the Hawks has him representing the Atlanta Hawks in the first NBA Ballers game. Being a mid-season release, it actually was able to capture that very brief stint. An excellent little bit of video game trivia.
Yeah, and the Rasheed Wallace move is another move that resulted in a championship. We went over a few earlier, right? Marc Gasol with the Raptors, that resulted in the championship. The Jason Kidd trade, sure, it happened a couple years later, but that helped the Mavericks win an NBA championship. And that brings us to number 4, which led to an NBA championship. Clyde Drexler to the Rockets in 1995. And this article has some typos in it. It says Clyde Drexler to the Rockers, Andrew, not Rockets, the Houston Rockers.
That sounds like a super dunk shot team.
Yeah. I mean, if I ever got around to creating my own basketball video game and I didn't have the license, I'm going with the Houston Rockers.
Yep.
The Rockets received Clyde Drexler and Tracy Murray. Trailblazers received Otis Thorpe, draft rights to Marcelo Nicole, and a first-round pick. Marcelo, not familiar with. I will state, obviously, familiar with Tracy Murray, sharpshooter, and Otis Thorpe, who was part of the 1994 title team and was a fan favorite, loved by all of his teammates, and that made that trade really tough on the Rockets in the short term. Drexler wasn't exactly welcomed, from what I read and from what I've heard, with open arms. And however, it was the right move. In fact, without Drexler, I don't think they have a shot at winning it that year. He was instrumental during the playoff run. He was incredible in the NBA Finals, averaging over 20 points a game, around 7 rebounds, 7 assists a game, etc. I've watched that 1995 Finals many times, and he was a matchup nightmare for the Orlando Magic. But yeah, pairing Drexler with Akeem, surrounding them with shooters, Robert Ory, Kenny Smith, Sam Cassell, Mario Ellie, and whatnot. That team was just so well constructed after that trade. And I think that trade gave them the momentum to have that playoff run. But yeah, Houston goes back to back, one with Drexler and one without.
Yeah, that was controversial at the time. As you say, not necessarily welcomed by everyone. Vernon Maxwell, very infamously, not particularly happy about that trade and losing his starting spot. Funnily enough, Clyde Drexler did come off the bench in his first game with the Rockets. That is represented, immortalized in NBA Live 95 PC, where he's the sixth man on the Rockets. Basically based on that debut game, he was then in the lineup for pretty much the rest of his Rockets career. I think maybe he came off the bench for a couple of games, but generally the starter for the Rockets from that point on. And it's funny because the Rockets weren't struggling that much when they acquired him, and they didn't really have a great finish with him, compared to, say, Michael Jordan coming back for the Bulls around the same time, and they had a strong finish as MJ was shaking up the rust. But come the playoffs, the magic proved to be too much for the Bulls. Meanwhile, the Glide had a fantastic postseason, as you said, instrumental in that underdog run, and then they got to the finals. He was amazing, flirting with the triple-double average there. Big part of the reason they went back-to-back.
It's also important to note with Vernon Maxwell, if you want to know how bad the chemistry could be at times, how there were still hard feelings after the trade went through. In the first round of the playoffs, Vernon Maxwell was brought in at the end of the game to take a key shot, and he hadn't played much of the game prior, and he ended up missing that shot. But from what I've read, he was so upset about, not being in the role that he was the previous year, being that starting shooting guard, being that key cog, the big minutes player, big shot taker, all of that stuff, that he just quit on the team in the first round of the playoffs, and he never came back. And I think that is the only instance that I can think of a player doing that in NBA history. So it's definitely worth noting, but it also tells you that things weren't all great in that locker room after that trade, even entering the playoffs. The chemistry may have not been close to what it was the prior year, at least certainly not for Vernon Maxwell.
Yeah, I mean, he has that second ring by virtue of being on the team that year and still technically under contract, but like you said, quit on the team, basically granted an indefinite leave of absence, and ended up on the 76ers the next year.
At number 3, Pau Gasol to the Lakers. In 2008, Lakers receive Pau Gasol in a second-round pick. Grizzlies receive Kwame Brown, Javaris Crittenton, who spent more time in prison than on a basketball court, Andrew. Aaron McKee, draft rights to Marc Gasol, and 2 first-round picks. Obviously, this is the trade that prompted the famous rant by Stephen A. Smith on ESPN, where he called Kwame Brown a scrub and, basically crapped on all of his abilities or lack of abilities as a basketball player, stating that this was a steal for the Lakers. And obviously, I don't agree with Stephen A. Smith, and actually don't agree with him the majority of the time, and I hate his presence on TV, to be honest with you. But in this case, he was right. Obviously, that resulted in 2 NBA championships for the Los Angeles Lakers, one in 2009 and another in 2010.
Yeah, and this, along with the Jason Kidd deal, forced the NBA to look at rules around re-signing players to trade them. Keith Van Horn, of course, part of that Jason Kidd trade, despite being retired. Oh no, I'm totally going to report to the Nets again. And I think he did as much as he legally had to allow that trade to go through. And a similar deal with Aaron McKee basically being an assistant coach at that time, re-signing just to get traded. A huge move that allowed Kobe to get those 2 rings without Shaq. Pau Gasol, I wouldn't say an unsung hero, but it definitely deserves his flowers for what he contributed to those 2 titles. And yeah, I'm kind of surprised that this is only number 3 on the list. There are a couple of deals that might be there. I'm trying to guess what they are, but this definitely was one of the biggest deadline deals. Felt very lopsided. Marc Gasol obviously panned out when he came to the NBA, but yeah, in the short term at least, definitely a steal for the Lakers.
So I'll tell you why you would never have guessed number 2 on this list, Andrew, is it didn't actually happen at the trade deadline, so it's a mistake in the article. It states Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce to the Nets in 2013, which, this trade actually took place in the summer. Nets receive Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, Jason Terry, and DJ White. Celtics receive Gerald Wallace, Chris Humphries, Marshawn Brooks, Keith Bogans, Chris Joseph, 3 first-round picks, and a first-round pick swap. That is a true rebuild trade right there, number one. Number two, the results don't speak for themselves with this one either, and Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce were entering the twilights of their career, both in their mid-30s. So yeah, this shouldn't be this high anyway, but it wasn't even a trade deadline deal.
That is a huge mistake to make on a list like this. And I know that lists like this are just for fun and discussion and engagement, but yeah, come on, do your research. If you're going to be listing deadline deals, make sure you're actually listing deadline deals. And it takes me back to the Deron Williams entry, actually, because the Nets were still in New Jersey when they made that deadline deal, of course, after the spat with Jerry Sloan, and Jerry Sloan resigned. And we thought, okay, well, Deron Williams won that argument, and then the Jazz traded him anyway. At the time, they were still the New Jersey Nets, but they were gearing up to move to Brooklyn, I suppose, so it's accurate in that respect. But yeah, a little bit of research failure here, Derek.
I mean, they called the Houston Rockets the Houston Rockers. And Desagna Jop, Desagna Dip.
Could have been worse. They could have called him Saggy Dip. That would have been insulting.
Yeah, that's another generic name you could use for a non-licensed basketball video game. At number one, Luka Doncic to the Lakers, 2025. Lakers receive Luka Doncic, Maxi Kleber, and Markieff Morris. Mavericks receive Anthony Davis, Max Christie, and a first-round pick. The article states, could any other deal possibly be number one? This was the rare modern blockbuster that felt seismic the moment it broke. Was it fake news? It actually seemed too enormous to be real. The Lakers are always big game hunting, and they pounced when Dallas showed interest in moving the face of its franchise. Los Angeles immediately improved around LeBron and shaped their next decade. The Mavericks, meanwhile, hit reset with Anthony Davis and a 2029 first-round pick. Though this trade has yet to result in a championship, nothing else comes close to the star power and shock value this one provided.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're waiting to see how it's going to pan out in the long run. Certainly a great acquisition for the Lakers, the rich getting richer, just when it seems like they might need to start looking towards a new rebuilding phase. They get Doncic. Certainly a terrible deal from the Mavericks standpoint. Really no defense for it. Yes, they've ended up with Cooper Flagg. Yes, he's looking like a future star, obviously, but at the same time, still a head-scratching deal. I'm fine with it being number one, simply for the infamy, simply for how out of the blue it was, the ramifications that it has for the NBA moving forward. I can accept that. You know, obviously we're going back years with this list, but that is some fair recency bias there. Yeah, I can understand why they ranked that number one. Before we go on, a reminder that the NLSC podcast comes out every week on the NLSC, NBA-live.com, as well as our YouTube channel. We're also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast apps. If you're listening on any of those apps, we'd greatly appreciate a review. To keep up with the show and everything we're doing with basketball gaming in general, connect with us on social media. On Twitter and Facebook, we are the NLSC. We also have an Instagram, NLSC Basketball, and on YouTube, we're youtube.com/NBA Live Series Center. Once again, visit us at NBA-live.com, where in addition to the podcast, you'll also find all of our original content, as well as our forum and modding community.
So before we get to the community responses, we did want to go over the 2 community questions and answer them ourselves. As far as trade deadline history, Andrew, related to my favorite team growing up, the Boston Celtics, super uninspiring. In fact, the only trade deadline deal that I really remember as, being a big deal in my mind was when we got Antoine Walker back. Antoine Walker was acquired by the Boston Celtics from the Atlanta Hawks in exchange for Tom Gugliotta, Gary Payton, Michael Stewart, and the least favorable 2006 first-round pick. And I want to point out that it was a big deal because, we had made the Eastern Conference Finals with Antoine Walker and Paul Pierce in 2002, obviously got taken down by the Nets that year. But what Antoine Walker, despite his erratic play, was mostly a crowd favorite. Crowd fed off his energy. We at home usually fed off his energy. And having him back in green was a big deal. He donned number 88 originally and then talked Al Jefferson into getting number 8 back, employee number 8. I make baskets, Antoine Walker. So, I remember that one vividly. That was a big deal. Also, Yuri Welch in that trade deadline was acquired by the Cleveland Cavaliers from the Boston Celtics in exchange for a conditional 2007 first-round pick, Cleveland's own, and a TPE. And one thing I'll remember about Yuri Welch is he did have a couple really good games with the Celtics, ended up fizzling out in Cleveland and not having, a long NBA career. But I remember a couple good games, and Tom Heinsohn, our local color commentator, I think he compared him to John Havlicek. That looked like John Havlicek and whatnot. And it's like, no, it didn't. Tommy, you're just too excited. It reminds me of the time when Leon Poe was having a great playoff series and a great game and whatnot, and he likened him to Bill Russell. Tommy Heinsohn could definitely exaggerate at times, but yeah, Yuri Welch, no, not like John Havlicek, and no, Leon Poe is not like Bill Russell.
Not the greatest Tommy points there, no. And it feels like most of the Celtics' best moves over the years have been in the off-season, either the big trade or through the draft.
Exactly. And I was looking at the entire history of trade deadline deals, and I was like, there was one involving Vitaly Potapenko where we got him and shipped out Andrew DeClerc. Like, that was kind of a big deal because I was an Andrew DeClerc fan. But as far as like from a results standpoint, from a, franchise-altering standpoint, there was nothing there, right? So what about you for the Bulls?
Well, before I get to the Bulls, which is a very similar situation to the Celtics, I think, most of the great moves in the offseason, like Will Perdue for Dennis Rodman, what a great move there, obviously. But I was kind of surprised not hearing the Adrian Dantley for Mark Aguirre trade, which helped the Pistons win back-to-back championships, obviously. But I looked it up, and that was actually February 15th, 1989, whereas the trade deadline that year was February 23rd. So technically not a deadline deal. I think some of the deals that we remember were around the deadline, but not at the deadline. So if we're going to be strict about deadline deals, although obviously this article isn't because they had an off-season deal at number 2, but that is why that one didn't make it. But that is definitely a mid-season trade, if you will, Derek, that's worth mentioning.
Not only that, there was a trade on February 25th, 1988. That included Kevin Johnson. Its Cavaliers traded Kevin Johnson, Tyrone Corbin, and Mark West, and a 1988 first-round draft pick and second-round draft picks, and a 1989 second-round draft pick to the Suns for Larry Nance, Mike Sanders, and a 1988 second-round draft pick. That put Kevin Johnson with Phoenix, right? And both teams won this trade in a way. Kevin Johnson ended up being an incredible player with the Phoenix Suns, and they ended up making the finals in 1993. And he was their floor general. He was an amazing player. And then Larry Nance filled a need for the Cleveland Cavaliers, and they had some incredible teams and some good playoff runs and whatnot. But I thought that trade was significant for both sides.
Agreed. Definitely an omission. So as far as Bulls deadline deals, like I said, not many that stand out as particularly memorable, particularly great. That has been my issue with Bulls management, since the breakup of the champion Bulls of the 90s, is that they haven't really made a lot of shrewd deals. And this goes back to the offseason as well. They've made some pretty good deals, some pretty good draft picks here and there. They've gotten lucky winning the lottery in 2008, of course, and getting Derrick Rose, and then very unlucky with him injuring his knee, obviously. But there hasn't really been a whole lot of shrewd deals at the deadline or otherwise. The one that sticks in my mind, because I was watching the NBA so closely, consuming every bit of content that I could at the time, is from the 98 season, The Last Dance, trading Jason Caffey to the Warriors for David Vaughn. David Vaughn I hadn't seen a whole lot of, but I knew him from video games, knew him from collecting trading cards, originally drafted by the Magic, actually a second-generation player. His father played in the ABA, but the Bulls acquired him. He played 3 games with the Bulls. It was enough to put him on the Bulls roster in Kobe Bryant and NBA Courtside, the first NBA Courtside game, Derek. He played 3 games with them. They cut him. He went to the Nets. He had a big block on MJ in kind of a revenge game with the Nets against the Bulls. And then, of course, the Bulls swept the Nets in the first round that year. But I do remember that being in the top 10 plays that week after the Nets picked him up. And he blocked MJ's dunk. And they were talking about it as being kind of a very memorable moment for him, especially having been recently cut by the eventual champion and then defending champion as well, Chicago Bulls. But that's kind of the only one that really stands out because of that notoriety and that trivia note, because again, the Bulls haven't really made a whole lot of great deals. I remember ones that stand out for being pretty poor, like trading Taj Gibson to the Oklahoma City Thunder for Cameron Payne and throwing in picks to sweeten the deal of a trade they were already getting the worst end of. So that's the kind of lack of shrewdness that really bothers me with Bulls management as they've tried to rebuild post-Jordan, which is obviously now going on 30 years. But yeah, again, their best moves, when they have made great moves, more so coming in the off-season.
How do you like this new ownership after Garpax? You got, like 1 million guards on the roster. You're stocking second-round picks. I don't know what the Chicago Bulls are doing right now, but they are an absolute mess.
Blowing it up and getting out of the play-in, I guess.
When you hear blow it up, though, you think teams, they're stocking first-round picks, right?
Oh, yeah.
They're stocking up first-round picks. Well,
that's a good way of doing it, yes.
They have some young, exciting players, young, exciting assets, guys that could be, potential key pieces maybe in the future and whatnot. I don't know what they're doing. The roster construction is a mess. Their future assets are a mess. I think you're going to be hearing, second round pick and cash considerations for a few years moving forward.
I mean, sure, if you want to rebuild properly, that would be the way to go, but that's just not their style, unfortunately. Yeah, I mean, I can't complain too much being a Bulls fan since the 90s, experiencing the greatness of Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, Dennis Rodman, and the second three-peat. So I've got some pretty damn good memories of watching the Bulls growing up, Derek. That's setting the bar high, obviously, a three-peat, Michael Jordan, but the lack of shrewdness, that's what bothers me. It doesn't feel like there's direction. It doesn't feel like they're making smart moves, thinking a few moves ahead. The Vooch trade wasn't too bad. He had a couple of decent seasons there, a couple of All-Star games. Even this year, he made a couple of game winners. I respect that, but yeah, just not the right moves.
So I got to the video game portion of this episode. I asked a question for franchise gamers. What trade were you able to make where you were surprised it went through? And who was the best player you ever traded for? I have not played franchises like this historically. I don't do season modes like this. Normally, usually head-to-head with my brothers or fantasy draft. We oftentimes turn injuries off. If we are playing with real NBA teams, we like to have them constructed like they were in real life for that season. So we keep those teams intact. So this one's going to be purely for you and the community. So let's start with what trade, Andrew, were you able to make where you were surprised it went through?
Well, for me, there's really only one answer to that question, and that is my NBA Live 2004 dynasty with the Chicago Bulls, when I managed to trade Jalen Rose, Marcus Fizer, and Roger Mason Jr. to the Minnesota Timberwolves for Kevin Garnett. And he is definitely the best player I've acquired by a trade in a franchise mode. And I am surprised it went through.
Yeah, that's not lopsided or anything. Yeah, that's not lopsided, Andrew.
Oh, not at all. Not at all. Very realistic. And that wasn't at the deadline. It was a bit earlier in the season. I was hovering around 500 about a quarter of the way through the season, and I had my story thread going in the forum, and I was exploring a couple of different scenarios because the 2004 Bulls, it's kind of interesting, especially with Pippen being back for that last run with the Bulls. But as much as they're an interesting video game team, unlike, say, the 1994 Warriors, they're not a great video game team, or even the 2014 Brooklyn Nets, for that matter. So I was looking to shake it up with a deal. And I looked at making the trade that they actually made that year, where they traded Jalen Rose to the Raptors, got Antonio Davis. Not very exciting, didn't really feel like a needle mover to me, didn't seem like something that was going to make the game more fun, so I also explored other wackier scenarios. And one of them was the aforementioned trade for Kevin Garnett. And I kind of ummed and ahed over it because it really does break reality to get that deal through, to say the least. But at the same time, it's kind of like, you know what, franchise modes for me are about fantasy. I like having a realistic starting point and then creating my own reality and making the moves that I wish the Bulls or whoever I'm controlling could make in real life. What would be interesting, what would be amazing. So I went ahead with that deal, and I was surprised that the CPU actually accepted the deal, especially because I've never been able to replicate it. I've run simulations in Live 2004 Dynasty with the Bulls, tried to get that deal through. I've never had the CPU accept that since. I've been able to get them to accept Marcus Fizer, Jalen Rose, and Jay Williams. I kept Jay Williams on the injured roster for the entire season because, of course, he did miss that season and eventually retired, of course. So I was holding him out for that entire season to respect that scenario, to bring that bit of reality into my dynasty. So I can make that trade go through with Jay Williams, who is rated a bit higher than Roger Mason Jr., just slightly. But getting that exact deal through, yeah, I haven't ever been able to replicate it since.
Well, with getting rid of Marcus Fizer, you lost some muscle. So Minnesota won in the muscle department.
Yeah.
Right? Marcus Fizer, bigger than Kevin Garnett, bigger arms, can throw his weight around and whatnot. So if that's what Minnesota was looking for, and it had absolutely nothing to do with basketball talent and the ability to win games, then they won the trade.
Yeah, and of course it is funny that the Timberwolves had probably their best season, certainly until Anthony Edwards came along and they made the Western Conference Finals again. So, yeah, in my reality, I really screwed them over.
Lastly, who was the best player you ever traded for? Is it Kevin Garnett?
I think it would have to be KG. I'm trying to think of some other top-rated players that I traded for. And, I got Chris Webber in a Live 2001 franchise, and Jason Kidd kind of gutted my bench to make a really fun starting five with the Knicks. That franchise didn't last too long, and it didn't help that I wasn't totally feeling Live 2001 at the time. My apologies to the Live 2001 legends. I do appreciate that game more now, having revisited it a few times over the years, but that franchise did fall through. But as far as being able to acquire one of the top-rated players in the game for, a package that would never go through in real life, that felt like a very shrewd deal to me, or I'd say taking advantage of the CPU's lack of intelligence, though once again I've never been able to get it to go through again, so that was certainly a momentary lapse in the AI in Live 2004 there. But yeah, I'd say he is the best player that I've acquired via a trade, and certainly for the best deal.
So let's get to the community responses to this one. VF Baller at VF Baller states, NBA 2K14, Paul Millsap for DeMar DeRozan. NBA Live 06, Kirk Heinrich for Corey Maggette. NBA Live 15, Joakim Noah, and 2 firsts for Carmelo Anthony. And he states the best trade, NBA 2K2, Bo Outlaw, Daryl Armstrong, and a first for Kevin Garnett. The Magic already had Tracy McGrady and Grant Hill, and now he was able to pair KG with them. Yeah. So in video games, you don't really have to worry as much about Grant Hill's injuries, right? So you can have a prime Grant Hill, prime Tracy McGrady, and now KG together. That is a monster video game team. And yeah, Bo Outlaw and Daryl Armstrong in a first for a primed Kevin Garnett. Yeah, that could never happen in real life. So some failed trade logic there in NBA 2K2. Getting rid of Captain Kirk and getting Corey Maggette in NBA Live 06 is definitely good for that video game because Corey Maggette is excellent going to the basket and he can still hit that three. And the Joakim Noah in NBA Live 15 and 2 firsts for Carmelo Anthony, that is a steal, really, at that point. Because Joakim Noah, in reality, didn't have many good seasons or healthy seasons left, and Carmelo Anthony, you could still put up numbers in that game.
Yeah, that one might have my trade for KG beat. Excellent wheeling and dealing there. And of course, we're talking about user-initiated trades here, but when you are playing franchise modes with trades on and CPU-initiated trades and trades between CPU teams, you do see some odd deals from time to time. And it wasn't the same NBA Live 2001 franchise that I mentioned before with the Knicks. It was one that lasted a little bit longer with the Bulls, actually. But very randomly, the Magic traded Tracy McGrady to the Bucks for Ray Allen. And of course, Tracy McGrady was an off-season signing in 2000, the big acquisition along with Grant Hill in 2000. So the idea that they gave up on him, a few games into the season and traded him for Ray Allen was pretty funny to me.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense, but at least they're both all-stars.
Yes.
From a talent perspective and from an age perspective and whatnot. I don't know if you could see it happening, but at least it's a little bit more realistic.
It's even.
At least from the talent perspective, yeah. Stasho Bro at Nate Stasho states, not a trade, but I remember doing a fantasy draft in NBA Live 2006 and getting LeBron and Wade back when I was a kid. So, yeah, some foreshadowing there for the team up in 10-11.
Yeah, and I've never been the biggest fan of fantasy drafts, which is not to say that I hate the concept and I want it in the game because I know that people like you and your brothers absolutely love it, and I think it is a great option. But yeah, as I said, I've always preferred to have that realistic starting point and create a fictional alternate reality. But yeah, obviously a very fun feature for people who enjoy it, and yeah, foreshadowing, as you said.
And lastly, on X, Mike P for free at Mike Pritchard states, I don't remember the actual players involved, but I did the Marbury trade to the Knicks in real time. During my season in NBA Live 04, it was McDice for Marbury plus fillers each side. It meant I could stick with my season without starting over. So yeah, it was great when basketball video games suddenly had that ability, right? To do trades and whatnot mid-season. And that way, if you were playing the video game during the real NBA season and the game allowed you to make those deals, you were able to continue that season and kind of feel good about it like it was, just a continuation of the real NBA season.
Yeah, I mean, obviously creating your own reality is a blast. It's one of the things that I love about franchise modes ever since they came into basketball video games. And of course, season modes before that, but franchise modes just added so much more depth. But yeah, it could be a fun challenge to try and pull off real trades. Not always easy. I think people pointed out last year that NBA 2K25 wouldn't accept the Luka Doncic trade. It didn't consider that a fair trade, which, hats off to 2K. They certainly had a point there. But yeah, it can be a lot of fun to replicate deals. It's what I did with my NBA Live 96 season with my 1998 roster update for the PC version. I was following along with the season. I was making deals because you can manage the rosters for all the teams. I was having players out when they were missing time due to injury, so I was trying to replicate the season while also creating fictional results, and ultimately replicating the real result and then winning the championship, of course. But yeah, following along with the real season can be a lot of fun, and when you can make those deals happen, it's quite satisfying. So jumping over to Facebook for a few more responses to this community question, Alejandro says, in NBA Live 2005, as the Bobcats GM, traded Jason Hart, Eddie House, and Bernard Robinson for Iverson. The Sixers were desperate for a point guard. Okay, I think you've actually got me beat, Alejandro. I'm pretty proud of my KG trade, but swapping Jason Hart, Eddie House, and Bernard Robinson for Iverson, that is some shrewd wheeling and dealing, Derek.
Can you imagine, still in his prime, Allen Iverson on the Bobcats? Can you imagine him reporting to the Bobcats and actually playing through a contract with them? That's something that could only happen in video games.
Sixth Man of the Year says, in 2011, in NBA Live 08, it was the Miami Heat Big Three era, so I decided a three-team trade, Raptors, Heat, and Cavaliers. I'm happy it went through, and it was so powerful back then, because in Live 08, Bosh, Wade, and LeBron are each in MVP form. Yeah, very nice job to swing the deal there. I can kind of relate, because in 2011, I dusted off my NBA Live 06 dynasty with the Bulls, and I wanted to freshen it up, so I decided to take some inspiration from the current NBA and acquire Kyle Korver and Carlos Boozer, who were then playing for the Bulls. In that case, I was playing through my second season in NBA Live 06, which of course is the 2007 season, and I'd already made some other moves, some of which I didn't really like, so I managed to undo them and kind of undo the damage I did with stacking my team a bit too much and robbing other teams of talent. That was a good move to not be too stacked and get too bored with that team. But when I dusted that off in 2011, that save file, I decided to take some inspiration from the 2011 Bulls. And also, funnily enough, with Live 08, when I was testing one of my roster updates, Derek, I believe the 2013 roster, I'd always simulate through in Dynasty mode to make sure there were no crashes. And on one of those tests, the CPU randomly traded LeBron James from the Heat back to the Cavaliers. I'm not sure who they traded him for. I don't think it would have been a very even trade. But yeah, they reversed that trade that I made in the roster update.
Yeah, I think in real life, LeBron's going to end his career with Cleveland. I think you probably have that in the back of your mind, too.
It's sounding like it, yeah.
It's sounding more and more like things are going to go that way. And that'll be great for Nate and Roger. They're from Ohio. And I think that, they're LeBron fans and whatnot. And I think that they would love to see him go back.
Mike says, in NBA Live 2004, as the Pistons, trading Eldon Campbell and Corliss Williamson to the Cavaliers for rookie LeBron James. It blew my mind that was able to work. And of course, LeBron is rated 69 overall in the default rosters of Live 2004. That was the year they switched from the in-game 50 to 99 to the internal 0 to 99 rating scale. They didn't necessarily do a great job of polishing up all the ratings. When they did that, we've talked before about how a lot of the Legends ratings are really off in Live 2004, Derek, and the rookies were definitely rated very low. LeBron, the first overall pick there, and yes, he was still unproven. Yes, he was out of high school. Yes, there was a lot of hype at that point, but definitely very low in the default rosters. So not too surprised that he was able to pull that off, but still very cool.
Well, Ricky Davis and Carlos Boozer said that they thought LeBron was going to come into the league and be a role player. So if that had actually been the case, then maybe that trade would have been fair and legit. But he ended up being a little bit more than that.
And finally, Rutastic Jesse says NBA Live 2004 as well, and also another LeBron deal, this time Karl Malone for LeBron James. And of course, Karl Malone on the Lakers that year, LeBron James on the Lakers now. So a bit more foreshadowing there, Derek.
Yeah, and Karl Malone in his 40s. So, yeah, another trade that could only happen in video games. So that's it for the community responses for that community question. We're going to end the show with the second part. Now that the NBA trade deadline is over, we want to know historically related to your favorite team, favorite trade, least favorite trade, trade you wish your team made. Roger Ward, Live 01 Legend, states favorite, getting Kevin Love. Worst, trading for Yuri Welch. And he states, wish we traded for Amare Stoudemire during LeBron's first run. Surprised Roger didn't want an updated version of John Havlicek on the Cleveland Cavaliers, aka Yuri Welch. But obviously that didn't last too long. But he obviously really hated Yuri Welch. But yeah, getting Kevin Love, that was a big deal.
I mean, we are talking about video game legend Yuri Welch, so you got to enjoy it on the virtual hardwood, at least.
Mike P for 3 at Mike Purchard states, honestly, as a Knicks fan, trades at the deadline historically have gone well for us. For example, trading half of our team for Carmelo Anthony. So I'm glad we are waiting till the offseason to pursue Giannis. Trades I love are what the Bulls are doing. I think the Jazz got a steal in Jaren Jackson Jr. I'm sorry, but I don't love what the Bulls are doing. Based on stocking up on only second-round picks and loading their roster with guards. Just not sure what they're doing over there.
Yeah, I don't see the vision, but at the same time, I'm certainly not surprised.
And lastly, QB1120 on Discord states, favorite, this might sound weird, but Shaq for Lamar Odom, Caron Butler, 2 players I was a fan of, and Brian Grant. Least favorite, Russell Westbrook trade. My God, this trade set the team back so much. Trading KCP and a 3-and-D guy and then letting Caruso walk. They still are searching for 3-and-D players to this day. Eddie Jones and Glenn Rice. I was actually a fan of Rice at the time, but in hindsight, he wasn't a great fit and was on the tail end of his career, while Eddie is my all-time favorite Laker. One I wish they made was the Chris Paul trade. I understand what he's saying about Glenn Rice, but Glenn Rice did give them a good campaign in 99-2000 and actually helped them to win that NBA championship, their first NBA championship of the three-peat in the year 2000.
Yeah, I remember being kind of surprised by that. Of course, there were a lot of players moving around during the lockout season, or the abbreviated off-season before it tipped off. So I suppose I was expecting more players to move around, but Glenn Rice was, very recently, an all-star with the Hornets. But I do believe he was dealing with some injuries during the off-season. Didn't play a lot during the lockout season of 1999. From memory, he didn't actually play any games for the Hornets that year, was inactive until being traded to the Lakers. But as you said, did turn out to be that solid third option in 2000. And with the Chris Paul trade, I mean, I understand, especially from the perspective of a Lakers fan, it did feel like the NBA maybe overstepped there. It wasn't necessarily clear why they vetoed that trade, whether they were just upset that Dell Demps had made that move without consulting with them first. But I don't think it necessarily would have worked out as far as success, as far as winning a championship. I think they would have gutted their team a bit too much. That being said, Kobe and CP3 together would have been fun to watch, I imagine.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it leads to an NBA championship. It would have been exciting for the fans, though, for a while, as long as everybody stayed healthy and whatnot. It is worth noting that Glenn Rice, I was watching a Lakers game, I think it was towards the end of the regular season in 99-2000, and they were talking about how Glenn Rice wasn't happy with his role, right? He wanted a bigger role on a team, felt like he was playing third or fourth fiddle on that Lakers team most of the time. So, from that point of view, that Glenn Rice deal wasn't great. It helped them win that first title. He wasn't really enjoying his time there from what I could tell, and he wanted a bigger role. So, thank you to the community for all the responses to this week's community questions. Great interaction with the show, Andrew, and a fun topic.
Absolutely, and please keep the conversation going. With that being said, that has brought us to the end of this week's show. Thank you for tuning in. And a reminder, you can catch us every week on the NLSC, our YouTube channel, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast platforms. Also, both we and the NLSC are on social media, and would appreciate a follow. So, Derek, go ahead and plug the handles.
Hey, you can reach me on X, formerly known as Twitter, at D43G and at D4384. I'm also on the NLSC, D43, and on YouTube, D43.
As for me, I'm Andrew in the forum, and Andrew NLSC on X and Blue Sky. The NLSC is on X, Facebook, and Blue Sky at the NLSC. We're also NLSC Basketball on Instagram and Threads. We're on YouTube at NBA Live Series Center. And of course, keep a look to the NLSC itself, NBA-live.com, for all things basketball gaming. So, thank you again for tuning in, and until next time, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Derek.
Go get buckets, everyone.